why don't we start with maybe just what our interest in sound is, just because normally, because we're a nice gathering, we could probably just say what we're interested in, if that's all right. And it can be anything, nothing's wrong and nothing's right as well. And then we can just make sure that we're covering all bases. So Lauren, are you there? Christine Piper is coming as well. Hi, Lauren.
Hiya.
Do you want to start about what you'd be interested in, and your role with sound so far?
So I am a theatre maker and often am doing things on quite a small budget in terms of employing people to do work. And I really love how sound transforms a piece, like the use of music, use of sound in general. And I think I would like to be more confident talking to a sound person about what I'm looking for and being able to really harness their creativity and expertise. Because I think I kind of know this kind of sound world I'm looking for, but I have no technical skill at all.
That's really good. That's a really key thing. Yeah, as a maker. Oliver, welcome. This is Outer Limits, and we've been doing this. This is week 9, and so obviously we have a kind of special guest each week, and this one's very sound related. Where are you, Oliver? Where are you based?
I'm in Leytonstone at the moment.
Brilliant, great, cool. And what's your interest in sound?
So for me, this is something that I'm quite new to. I don't know so much about. I've done a lot of acting, but I've started to really want to create my own work as well. About a year ago, I did a job that was like a multimedia project that completely relied on sound to tell the story. That most of it was pre-recorded. Loads of sound displays, light displays, and it just sort of opened my eyes to the possibilities, how far you can go with these things. So I guess I'm just here to listen and learn more. And yeah,
great. And Adenike, what's your interest in sound?
I think it's just more in terms of where you basically creating a script, and sometimes you can't really hear the location and stuff. So it's just how a sound designer will bring that out. And also, if you're transferring, if you're writing for stage, but then I also want to try and write for radio, and then how that sound is enhanced as well. So it's just a difference, and basically find it.
I think that's a really good question about how writers think about sound as they're writing, because quite a few do actually. That's an interesting one. How you're thinking about that as you're going, how you can actually, how the playwright can lead on a sound design actually as well, because they sort of do on set design and quite often on their Lex as well. Alex, so you are a sound person. What's your...
Yes. Well, I kind of, my interest here is more about kind of trying to pivot from an engineering perspective and a facilitator to a more design-based discipline, because I'm kind of come from a background of solving problems and connecting things, putting things together and making things work, but not necessarily creating something new from scratch. And this is something I've kind of been doing a little bit more in this environment with podcasts and stuff. A friend of mine, we started putting together like an audio fiction podcast, and that was our starting point. Just to kind of get into what we listen to and how we interpret sort of where we are and where we're going and what's going on, like just through audio, without any of the staging. But I'm here to sort of pick up more, trying to find out how can career change. Maybe not quite.
Great. I'm sure that we'll definitely touch on some of that. Richard.
Hi. Well, I just got really fascinated last week when you mentioned, Doug, the writing for sound, and it's a bit like the other comment. I was really interested in adding that dimension too. I also hear sound, obviously, when I write. So,
great.
just really fascinated to hear from two like that.
Okay, great, brilliant. Ed?
Hello, thank you. Similar stuff, like very much like writing with sound in mind. I'd like to hear more about that. I'd also like to know about how it's done these days, because I was trained a long time ago how to make sound for theatre, and that was cut and splice reel.
On a Revox.
I'd be really fascinated to know
where it's at now.
Where it's at now, and also one of the challenges for the 29 Plays Later was to write a play completely set in pitch black. So that really got my mind thinking of sound more. So I want to know how.
Great.
A bit more about that sort of thing.
Great. Rebecca.
Hiya. Yeah. Just here to kind of listen, really. I don't really know anything about sound, and I'm making some pieces that are interweaving music and interviews and stuff like that. So I guess, just to kind of pick up any tips that I can possibly get.
You use a lot of sound, Rebecca, in your work, actually, don't you?
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah. Yeah, but I've no idea. Literally, it's all downloaded on my phone and Dropboxed, and I'm a technical nightmare. So just anything that I can pick up that might be user friendly and ways to learn would be really, really great.
Brilliant. And Janine.
I mean, I'm going to be honest, no interest at all in sound. However,
you will by the end.
That's all right. Yeah, but because like I'm an actress, I know my process, which you know is not bad. And as a team, I know the director's kind of process. But light and sound haven't got a clue. So I think it's nice as that team to kind of find out what it involves. So yeah, just like Rebecca, just to listen really and find out what the process is.
Yeah, it's good to know everybody's process, isn't it, when we're making something? It's useful.
I think
Don't
so,
have an insight. Yeah. And Christine.
Hiya.
Hiya.
So obviously I'm currently head of production at the Queen's, but before that I was an electrician. Much like Ed, I learnt on reel-to-reel tape recorders. So I'm very happy splicing together tape. I remember getting excited because we had a mini disc machine in the building and going, this is the best thing since sliced bread. But out of all the disciplines, sound, I think, is the one that has changed the most since I was at college. I can still find my way around lighting, focusing, although it's got moving lights, but lighting generically is the same. We still build sets in the same way, make costumes in the same way, but sound has just gone completely stratospheric. I think it's the one that has changed the most in my time in theatre.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Yeah, I think that's the case for me. It'd be interesting for Helen and Leigh as well for their careers. What I'll do, that's really brilliant. That's really useful because that just helps us sort of guide some of the questioning. So yeah, kind of usual format. I will ask Helen and Leigh some questions, and then I'll open it up a little bit, open it up to all of your questions as well. Helen, you live in Norfolk now, don't you?
I live in Norfolk.
You're in Norwich, aren't you?
Yes.
And, Helen and we've known each other. I don't know how many years now. It's a long time, but we worked together with Complicity, didn't we?
Yeah, Doug gave me my first sound design, and I was terrified of him.
I was as close
because he was terrifying.
No, I wasn't.
Yeah, you were.
And we've actually done, and we worked together because I thought you were great. So we worked together. Actually, so I ran a company called Transport, and you probably designed everything for that company.
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
All of the work. So those who listen to Elegy, that is Helen's sound design. If anyone has listened to that, which is a very, very, very beautiful sound design. And we haven't worked with each other for a while. We keep trying, don't we?
No, I've got a little girl, so it's been harder for me to work so much in the last few years. So, and obviously I'm in demand, you know.
And you're in demand. And then and Leigh and I have worked together. Well, you've worked at the Queen's a couple of times.
Yep.
And then we worked on As You Like It, which was a mammoth.
Yeah. That was
so the NT Public Acts production with, oh God, how many people did it have? 150 people. And with it's a musical, it had how many mics on it? Radio mics did it have?
Oh, Christine, you'll have to remind me. 50? We were getting close to 50, weren't we?
I think it was about
around that, yeah.
And there lots of just swaps of microphones, and then sound design as well.
Yeah, and a remote band because the orchestra were substage, so we had to make sure that everyone could hear each other. So
yeah, it's a very, very complicated piece of engineering, that wasn't it? And mixing, and really good fun. And Helen, you've done lots of engineering and mixing as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. Coming back to what Alex was saying, is how do you transition? Is both myself and Leigh, I think, have both come from a background of engineering and being a sound engineer on the ground, and then just mostly, I don't know about you, Leigh, but for me, meeting assistant directors and going, hey, I'll buy you a drink. Do you want to be my friend? Okay, yeah, let's go make a show, you know. And then that's how you start designing. Sorry, Doug, it wasn't like that really. But, you know, and that's how you sort of get into designing. And then people go, oh, I'll ask you. And then they go, oh, who did that one? Oh, I'll ask them, you know, and that's how that's sort of how, so I think, but I don't think all sound designers come through that way. I think, but I think it's better, but it's obviously better, you know, for us if we do come through that way, because then you have an understanding of the technical stuff.
I think that's really important. I think to be an engineer first, you get, I think a sound designer that hasn't been through that technical process can be quite frustrated when then needing it to be practically realized. And if you're someone that's had that background, not only can you you know, engage with the operator. If you might not have an operator, it might be a play where you've literally got someone from stage management controlling it, or you've got a full-on team mixing it. But also you as the sound designer, I think, can approach it, and you know that you've been in those shoes with the person who's mixing at the back, and it's not going right in tech session one, but you know it will, and it's you can kind of back them up a little bit when everyone else is going, what's that feedback? And you go, well, you wait.
So tell us, I mean, obviously, so you were engineering first, but tell us, can we just go back a little bit further? Because I'm always intrigued that, because I think most people don't even come into contact with the idea of a sound designer being a job that exists. So how did, we know there are actors, might know about directors, but how do you end up being a sound designer? Engineer and then sound designer. How do you get into sound?
I was a geek who liked playing with my dad's stereo, and I went down I was mobile DJing at 14. And turning up to weddings, and people going, oh, like my dad driving me and saying to my dad, can you just put it over there? And, no, not me, him. And there's this little 14-year-old oik who's, thought, what would be really cool is if I can hook up my smoke machine to do this. So that was my interest in it. My dad was a musician of sorts, and I did youth theatre, and I acted for a bit. And as the shows that we were doing were more and more technically complex, I found myself getting more involved in that, and went onto a degree course that was nothing to do with sound, and I hated it for a year. And thankfully had a friend who just said, you're so unhappy, you need to go to Central, you need to go and do this course, which is really cool. So that was my journey into it. And I through, like a little bit like Helen said, with how you get your first kind of designs. In my third year at Central, like you just get asked if you could come and dep on a show, and so you'd be covering the lowest position on one of the shows in town maybe, and then you do that more and more often, and you suddenly find yourself in a full-time job. And that's how I started engineering. And then the first design I got was because one of the guys in the ensemble of a show I was doing, his dad was a producer, and they wanted to put on a bit of a crazy show with a snow gorilla. So I went and did that.
It's interesting, because there's a common about coming to careers is about exposure, isn't it? You were exposed to music and you were exposed to theatre.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that kind of combination. Helen, how did you end up in the...
Well, I did youth theatre, but I just did backstage youth theatre. I met a strange old production manager lady, Joy, who had a bunch of kids in her backyard building sets. And I thought I quite like this. I'm going to be a stage manager because, you know, I'm really love to tell people what to do. And so I went to art college after I finished my A-levels, and they were like, I wanted to be a stage manager, and I was like, I'm going to be a stage manager, and they were like, well, you've actually got a much more creative background than that. You should do something else. So I ended up going to do theatre, film, and television. And when I came out of that from a degree, and I was like, I'm going to be a documentary filmmaker. That's what I'm going to do. And then I did a series of MasterChef, and it was pretty hideous. But like, I was a runner, and then I was like, oh, go back to theatre. So and then they put me on the sound desk, and I was like, I don't know what any of these buttons do or anything like that. So, but then I was actually quite good at mixing, so they kept asking me to mix, and then I was like, oh, okay, I'll keep mixing. And then I started engineering, and then I started touring, and then I met Doug. And I did a few other bits as well, but then I met Doug, and I said, come on, let me do your sound design. And then yeah, there you go. And working at lots of different theatres, and, you know, always, as a woman, always trying to, you know, prove I was as strong as all the men.
Yeah, well, we will come on to that.
Really.
Just tell us, so because there are kind of complexities on there. So, engineering. What's the difference between designing, engineering, and composing?
One I'm great at, one I should be good at, and one I'm rubbish at.
Yeah. What is engineering?
My peers can decide on what one of them is. Engineering, I think, is how
plugging all the bits together.
Yeah, it's brushed. I mean, it's from the plugging it all together and knowing how it works to the other end of it of them making it sound good. I mean, anyone can go behind a desk, but knowing what I think the most common question I get asked if I'm mixing something, I'll have someone in the audience go, "Oh, how do you know what these buttons do?" And you go, "Well, it's the question that makes you go, well, I know what they do, because that's why hopefully it sounds as good as it does. Hopefully, if it doesn't, then don't tell me. I'm the lighting engineer."
So like on a musical, because we're talking about a musical, what are you mixing? What are all the buttons? What is it?
Every input that comes to the desk. If we're using a musical as an example, a musical at any kind of level would be made up of an orchestra, which everything is mic'd up in some sort of way. Okay. So an orchestra mic'd up, then you've got your cast who are all wearing microphones in some sort of way. They might not all be wearing them. You might have, there might be a budget constraint on all that sort of stuff. But then you have sound effects. This is where the sound designer obviously has an input on that, because obviously there's lots of sound effects to be firing. And generally, when you're mixing something, I always describe it as it's if you're listening to the album, you want it to sound coherent. You want it to make sure that the vocal, so therefore the narrative is getting across. But then the orchestra don't sound like a bag of spanners, in that you've got some sort of relatively good mix, so that you've not got a drum kit that's killing everything else, that you can hear the flute in that middle eight.
And then it sounds the same on all the levels as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think as the engineer at the back, sometimes you'll get called sound operator, which sticks in my jaw a little bit, because I think for what a lot of engineers do on shows, they're doing a lot more than just operating. Operating tends to suggest that they're pressing a button.
And it's not, I mean, it's like when you get somebody who can mix, it's a real gift, isn't it? It's a real, because there aren't that many people who can. I mean, it's a real skill, and it's quite creative as well, isn't it?
It's massively creative. I think it's one of the, as a technical member of staff, your relationship to the designer is probably one of the more creative ones that you've got on a show, because the sound designer will have an idea for how the show should sound, whether that be like a rock musical that should be, have big peaks and troughs in it, or it's a very genteel kind of nice, like My Fair Lady, that sort of thing, that, it should, the dynamic is kind of there from the inputs you get. And then night on night, it doesn't matter how long it's running, every night you could, as the engineer, could come in after the designer's gone home and go, you know what, I'm going to make this all loud, even though the designer wanted it quiet. And it changes, obviously, their creative input to the show massively.
And then the sound, so that's all the engineering. What's design? What is it, just in its basic?
Well, as a designer, liaising with the director. You're talking to the director. Just, you know, he or she is telling you what they like, what they want, what kind of vibe they're looking for. You then interpret that and work with them and the actors to then create soundscape or sound effects or whatever that is that goes with it. But then running alongside that, you're also going, how much money have we got? How much can we spend on this stuff? Where are we going to put the speakers? Where should we put the microphones? You're liaising with the engineer about how the system is going to go together, fit together in the theatre. So you're sort of, it's a twofold job, because you've got to keep an eye on the technical stuff, but you're also having a big creative input into and basically realizing the director's vision of what they want it to be. Yeah.
And some of that sound design can be like quite trad and just be a sound effect of a seagull.
Oh yeah, like that's the beauty of it.
Or it can be like stuff that we've done, which is pretty much the sound running through the whole of the show.
Yeah, you can get a show that's you know, you just got a couple of sound effects in it, and the composer's making all the music, and you're like, yeah, I can just relax. And you can get other shows where you're like, oh god, they keep asking me for more stuff, like, you know, like that. So yeah,
right. The break for lunch. The break for lunch is a good one, because everyone gets broken for lunch, and
because then you just sat there.
No, the director just asked me for 5 new sound effects before 2 o'clock. What do you think I'm doing now?
Yeah,
because it's the only moment that
because it's the only moment you've got. Yeah,
to hear it.
But also, I think even from everything you've described as a sound design, it's also placement. I think as we become more and more engaged with cinema, for instance, which has surround sound everywhere and that sort of thing, I think as sound designers, especially for me, I'm really interested in the placement of sound. So trying to deepen that kind of playing space. So although we sit, let's say, at the Queen's with a traditional cross arch, there is still a huge playing space that the actors engage with. So I'd like to engage that space as well. So that seagull, you know, in kind of times of old, you might just have a CD that has a seagull and you hear it coming from the pros. But if the seagull is supposed to be up there somewhere, then let's put it up there. If it's a radio that gets turned on, why can't that be a practical element that comes on stage that the actor engages with? You know, that sort of thing. And even if that means... Sorry, Helen, go on.
No, go on, no, go.
I would say even if the first 6 rows, even if it's only them that understand that, wow, that came from that radio, it's enabling us to be more immersed in the theatrical process and the theatrical piece as a piece. Yeah,
we quite often work with, just for sound effects, so I've worked with up to even sometimes more than 16 channels, so 16 outputs. So going to left and right, and then upstage and behind that door over there, and rear, you know, surrounds, like you were saying, and sometimes those surrounds are split, and so you can really make the sound come from wherever, and you can move the sound, which has a massively brilliant effect.
Yeah, and I think it is.
Yeah.
It's putting space into sound. You know, I think with light can do that with shadow and kind of texture, and color and stuff. I think we can play with space a lot better.
Yeah.
You know, which makes it more interesting, obviously.
And it makes it much more filmic, like you were saying.
I think it's interesting you're both talking about film, because I think that's probably, like Christine was saying about the role of sound. I think the role of sound is probably in theatre has been very influenced by film.
Massively, I think so. Yeah, because now you can be at home and you can even have like a sound bar in front of you, or you know, if you've got even you go to the cinema and the spaceship flies over you, you are going to spend the same amount of, or probably more money actually going to the theatre, but you're going to expect some sort of
immersion.
Immersion, which obviously is a little bit more complicated for us because obviously we're in a theatre, you know. But that proves it. I think that's one of the things I love about my job.
And it's quite manipulative. I mean, it's really good at creating worlds. Obviously, it helps. So you can have nothing on stage, and sound can really take us somewhere, can't it?
Yeah.
You know, you could just do it all with sound, and in terms of narrative and place and transporting somebody. But it's also, I mean, which I love about it, it's really it can be quite manipulative, like in film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Musically, or if there's there's a rumble underneath that we're not particularly aware of, but creates a sense of tension. Or
it's all of those techniques. Yeah.
And it's not just like you said, the seagull, is one thing, but establishing motifs for characters or things that are happening in a very subtle way is probably one of the cleverest things that we can do.
And quite often repetition as well. Like you say, motif. That's exactly what you were just saying. Yeah. Repetition of like different sounds that then appear in different places or different bits of music and stuff.
And then breaking
build the story to tell the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I've done a couple of shows where we've established that there are certain things that happen for certain people. One of them was we used a Steely Dan track, but it was fun to then break it open stem by stem and then use those stems in really different ways. So you might hear it as it was set in a Bitcoin world, and so we had dial-up internet, but what you didn't, that horrible we then incorporated some of the Steely Dan song into it because the director and I thought, well, we're keeping that motif, but we're in such a kind of bizarre left field way that, I mean, it's a geeky thing to do because I came away going, wonder if anyone noticed that, but it made me laugh, and it made it's adding that texture and that complexity to it.
What's one of your favourite soundscapes that you've made, straight Helen?
Oh, obviously, anything I've made with Doug is my favourite soundscape that I've made. No, actually, I guess I've got two favourites. One is the elegy that we did, Doug, because it probably was the first time I was really thrown into the fire, and I had to really think on my feet as you were sitting there going, I need something here. I want something here. It needs to be like this. And I was like, oh my God. And that was like, it's literally it's a one-man show and it's just him and the sound, basically. It's him and his brain, basically. So the whole thing just goes all the way through. And we had a composer, didn't we? We had a composer. So he wrote some music and then he just gave it to me. And then I was just like, right, we'll put this in here. So it was those are the things I like doing the most. And then also I work with a writer called Enda Walsh, who writes really bonkers plays. And I really like working on his projects because he writes it all down in the script, all the sounds. So I know exactly what I need to do. No, he doesn't just do that. But he gives me room to be creative within that as well. And he also always wants it to be completely mad. And so I have a massive amount of freedom to like put in like cats being run over backwards and and like all sorts of weird ass sounds that like what if I do this and then it sounds like this and all of this kind of stuff. So
but that sort of gets me to the point about because we haven't mentioned the composer apart from obviously we had a composer on the elegy, but I thought kind of often we were talking about this before everyone came in, is that I often think the sound designer is composing in a way, like the sound, but not composing music. You're what you guys can do with.
Yeah, because you layer it. I know that quite often when I've done shows with Doug, we've not had a composer. We've just had music tracks that we've really enjoyed, and then we've stripped them back and layered them with sound. And then you take sounds that you've recorded or sound effects or whatever, and you make stuff on your computer or synths, and you put it all together, and you are composing.
Oh, I think we lost you.
Shape or form. So, but like, oh, have you lost me?
No, you're back.
But I guess it is like a composition in that way.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, but it's not a competition. Like, no, someone couldn't sing to it, but Yeah.
Good.
I finished.
Okay. Tell us about the collaboration then with because often it's the same as always. It's about. It'd be interesting. When does the collaboration work well and when does it not work well? I mean, I suppose I'm talking about directors but there are obviously other elements like sound engineers, composers, playwrights. But when does the collaboration work well?
For me personally, I think it's when any of those people it's being receptive. I think everyone comes into it. We always talk about the collaboration of a project, and it's really important, obviously, as a lighting designer would work with the director to kind of have some ideas. I think that's when it works really well, because I can come to the table with a million ideas and they might not hit the mark at all for what you want, it's, you know, as a director. But it's about kind of being on the same page and understanding what that, you know, what that is that we're both trying to achieve. You know, and I think it's really obvious when that hasn't happened in a show. If you, I think it's really obvious, and you can really see where there hasn't been that collaboration, and it's just been two people just doing their thing, rather than it being collaborative.
And that just comes down to communication at the end of the day, really. Like, you know, it just comes down to the director sort of giving a brief, then you responding to that brief, and then them coming back. And also those things can be helped by mood boards, you know, like music mood boards or things like that, you know, like sort of, I really like these tracks, not that I want you to use them, but these tracks are inspiring me in this piece, this vibe is inspiring me. You know? And then so it's just about communicating, and then, you know, and then as you get to know your sound designer or your director, you then start to understand the way they think and what kind of things they like. And then there you go.
There was a thing about time, isn't there? Because sound is, I mean, I've been very lucky, obviously, particularly with you, Helen, is quite often you've been in the rehearsal room most of the rehearsal.
Yes.
I think it's great if you can do that. I think if that opportunity is there,
that's when you can be the most creative.
Yeah,
but I think for most, I'm sure you're both very busy now, and that probably makes it impossible to give, because you're often juggling numerous projects, aren't you?
Yeah, I think the more experience you get as a sound designer, you know you can produce the same kind of things in less time. I know that doesn't sound, and that can be frustrating for a director because they want you in the room all the time, but you just can't. At the beginning of your career, you're like, just sit here for hours. This is great, but you can't necessarily do that when you all the time, you know. But as much as you can, it is always beneficial to be in the room, because then you know what's going on. But I think the more experience you get, the less the easier it is to understand the communication quicker, if that makes sense.
I think also sometimes knowing when not to be in the room. I've had a few instances when I've sat there and thought, I'm not wanted here, you know. Not the Queens, but you know, in places you go, this isn't a process the director or the actors want me to be in at the moment, and that's cool. That's absolutely cool. I'll come back when you're in a position where I can see that you want me around.
Remember, it's interesting then when it's late, isn't it? I do remember, Helen, was something that we worked on. It was All My Sons. Do you remember? And it was the older actors. One of them has died recently.
Oh, they didn't like it.
They didn't like the sound, but that's because we introduced the sound too late.
Oh, was it? Okay, right.
It was in the last week of rehearsals. And that was the problem. Because they weren't part of that process early on.
But would they have accepted it any earlier though? I think it did come in earlier than that.
We didn't start playing stuff until quite late.
Yeah.
But it's about the relationship with the company, isn't it? About it not feeling as if it's suddenly just foisted on them. But I mean, it was partially because they're quite old-fashioned as well.
Yeah, it's about feeling. You got to show your face enough to feel part of the company, and be there.
Let's talk about, because you mentioned that it's about proving that you're as good as the men. There are more women in sound design. And it's not just for Helen to talk about this. It'd be interesting from Leigh's perspective as well. Is that, you know, there are more women coming into the design, but why is it? Why did you feel you have to prove yourself as good as the men, and then why aren't there as many women in sound designers?
Well, I think when I was an engineer, it was about can you get up that? Can you put this harness on and get up there and lift this speaker, and can you hump this flight case down those stairs? Do it, you know. Can you stand at the top of this ladder and do that, you know? Oh my God. So there's a lot of that, you know. I think as I got into designing, I was less aware, I didn't care so much, you know. It was less about the physical stuff. I think sometimes I haven't really had it much recently. I did a show last year. I did a project for CBeebies, and I remember being in the room, and one of the guys from the TV crew came up and spoke to my sound engineer and thought he was the designer, basically. And the sound engineer had to be like, "Oh no, she's the designer," and he was like, oh, "Okay." But other than that, I've never really noticed it. There are a lot of women in sound design because I think it's quite not touchy feely, but you know, it's a bit. It's kind of. I don't know actually why. Maybe it's easier transition. I don't know, Lee. What do you think? That was a really terrible answer. I'm sorry, everyone. I let you all down.
Not at all.
No, not at all. I think you're right, though. I think about that thing of the sound engineering thing in that stereotype of, I think, and also because I toured for a few years, and it would be very much, I toured with a female number 2, and the first thing would be, oh, you obviously won't be lifting the big stuff. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. Yes, she absolutely can. I don't know if you've seen my physical condition, but she's probably better than I am, you know. And I think that's a real misgiving. I think that it's some of the best engineers in town, for instance, are female, and that's not meant to be something to go, see, look, we all know this is right, but they're great, and I don't understand what it is. Maybe women have been put off by that. Who knows? I think I'm like Helen. I just don't know. I don't think it's it baffles me. I work on Matilda in town, and a team of 4, 2 of which, there was at one point there was more women than men in that team, and that purely came down to they were the best ones at the interview, you know, and that's. It baffles me when we get into this conversation because I just don't know why that would be.
But it's interesting about you. I mean, obviously we could go into cultural diversity within the industry as well, particularly within sound design. I mean, that's not. I mean, and that's across theatre, you know, and of course that's really been highlighted this week, and all of that discussion that's coming up on Twitter. I mean, we're fortunate at the Queen's because we've got Mikey, who is of colour, who's in sound, and he came through youth theatre. And it's interesting, both Helen and Leigh, you were talking about your contact as youth theatre, is that it feels as if we have to create more, we have to work incredibly hard to ensure that we make that contact, we make that connection, and obviously we have to all tear that apart and subsidise it and get into places where we're not making those connections. But
and then here we are back to a conversation of why we need support at the moment. In the arts, for an arts, you know, it's there, you know, absolutely. I wouldn't do what I do now had it not been for going to see theatre. Like I had parents that took me to see theatre, whether it be James and the Giant Peach at the Queen's when I was, God knows how long ago that was. It was a while ago. Or whether it be Starlight Express in town, or some random play that they took me to see, you know. So I think it comes from youth development. I think investment at that point is probably essential. Bang the box of saying arts is probably just as important as anything else on the curriculum.
I mean, unfortunately, drama has come off lots of the curriculum at school, because obviously my parents didn't take me to the theatre, and the only way I came to it was through drama at school.
Right.
So we all has to be part of our jobs now, doesn't it? Advocacy and with young people.
I mean, saying that, when I told my parents I was going to Central, my mum's first question was, what are you going to do for a job? As if I was going, I'm doing that just on a Saturday morning, Mum. So, Mum, if you're listening to this afterwards, it all works out right.
But just one thing, also, when you said that you've answered about women in musicals as well, because I sort of, at some point I thought there aren't many women designing musicals, are there? It's a very male-heavy industry.
Yeah, because I think that's because it is, designing a musical is a lot more about the engineering than the sound effects, as I would say, and therefore I think a lot more sound designers that come to musical theatre come straight from production engineering and engineering side of it. So therefore,
that's my background as musical theatre, and I would say as a designer, if you look at what I've done, it's more musical based, even if it might be plays with music. But that's because of where I've come from.
But Helen, what about you? Why aren't you designing musicals?
Why aren't I designing musicals? I don't know. I design musicals sometimes.
So you have all of those skills, didn't you? So
yeah, I do. I guess my career has taken me down a path where I do a lot of stuff that has like the National and Arts Council funding, or like I do a lot of festival stuff, so like Galway Arts Festival, or so I guess I do a lot more of that. And there is still that element where we use microphones and mic stuff up and all of that. But I guess I just haven't had a massive amount of. I've been offered them, but I guess, and actually at the point where I have my daughter, I probably got offered more musicals than I've ever been offered in my life. But I don't have time to complete any of that. So.
Okay, I'm going to just one thing. If people wanted to find designers, where would they find them?
There's something called the ASD, which is sorry, Lee, just totally jumped over your.
No, not at all. You said the same thing. Yeah.
Association of Sound Designers. It's not our union. It's our group. It's our group as such. And if you go on their website, they have a list of members on there, and that can range from like the the big boys that are doing all the stuff to like people who are doing stuff locally. There's like a really big array of different people on there. So, and you can just contact people straight from that. So.
Great. I'm keen to open up because obviously people have really specific things, and I'm sure we haven't covered everything. So it's time to open up to questions. We can just speak. We don't need to put anything in the chat or raise our hands. We can just speak. Does anyone want to ask a question?
I'm really curious about the what happened with this All My Sons production with the actors not liking sound and how that affected.
I don't know about that. I think it was really good production.
I know it was a brilliant production. It was a really, really special production. It was an older actor. I think it's partially because the actor couldn't remember their lines. And we introduced sound at that point. It was an added thing, and he flipped. And actually, I had it's very rare that's ever happened to me. Where I had because I thought he was a bit mean actually, and a bit mean to Helen. So we had had quite a falling out.
Did you?
About it? Yeah, we did.
What, you and I?
No, not you. No, the actor.
Oh,
and it's a shame because I'm not sure I ever forgave him. and I went to his funeral a couple of years ago, and I felt very bad about that actually. But I think it was more to do, and it's always a number of things coming together. It's never one thing or the other. I think he was really struggling with his lines because he was playing Joe. It was a massive part. It was really and that's a huge. But we should have introduced stuff earlier on. I think that's one of the things.
Was it just like was it the volume of it, or was it just you didn't like the?
It was just sound? It was new and it came into the room.
Right.
Well, because Doug quite likes to work with like lots of textures and soundscapey stuff, and normally in the past before that we'd introduced it a lot earlier, but it was at the Watermill, so it's in the back of Beyond, and I think I had been there, but we hadn't actually put stuff into, and then Doug was like, let's start trying putting some underscores underneath and see how it goes, and it just threw him, because obviously as soon as you stick in an underscore it creates an emotional reaction, and I think he just freaked. Although I don't really remember it that well. I mean, I thought I did a great job on that production.
It was a very good job. It was very beautiful. But I think it's a bit like Christine was saying earlier on. If you're of a particular generation, particularly as an actor, I think you might not be. As an actor, you might not be used to it. Because certainly when I started as a director at Salisbury on the training scheme, I mean, we spoke slightly about this before about lighting design as well, but there wasn't really a sound designer.
Well, no, sound designers used to be part of used to be part of the lighting team.
Yeah.
And also I think that the use of sound is quite contemporary. I think, in 20 years' time, we might be talking about holographic design or whatever. Who knows what that is? Video design will now...
Lasers.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, video, when you first saw a bit of video in a show maybe 20 years ago, it was bonkers and it was really out there. Now, using the same bit of software that we use, if you're using we'll probably talk about that in a minute, QLab, you can happily manipulate video like we can manipulate sound very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So I think it's quite a contemporary process. And so I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't understand what actors do. I don't understand how you do it. I try to, but credit to you. But you understand that when you go on stage, a light will be on you. Otherwise, the audience won't be able to see you. Now, if you're in a play, let's say you're doing something at the Globe, you understand that the light comes from the sun and your voice needs to be heard because you're going to project. But actually adding this kind of contemporary usage of sound, where we are adding that cinematic bed, I think it's, I mean, I think we've both had the same experience. Sorry, I've got a fly. I've got a fly in front of my face. I think we've both had the same experiences then, because I've certainly had, the first thing you have to do is that communication with that actor, because it's, you know, no, I don't want to wear a microphone. You know, that's a massive one that happened to me. Why do I have to wear a microphone? Well, it's a massive one.
Yeah.
You know, it's not because we don't trust you. It's because we just want to make sure that we can get across what you're doing. You know, that was an interesting one, because that was a production that was unmiked, you know, but I was brought in to be a kind of traditional sound designer on it to reinforce using microphones rather than amplify, which I think is another thing. You know, there's a million shows out there that are amplified. We know that because they're musicals, but there's also a handful of shows out there that will use microphones in a very subtle, very reinforced way to just, it's reinforcement. We're not trying to take it out of the natural plane, because if it's a Shakespeare, you know, for example, you don't want it to be amplified, but there are elements going on where there might need help or treatment. I don't know, probably Helen, you've probably used microphones probably more than I have for treatment. Treatment like vocal processing or reverbs or that sort of stuff, you know, or triggers and that sort of thing. I mean, that's not something I've done that much of, but that's because and also just to get it over, underscore, like, quite a lot. In fact, the show that I did with Doug with Complicity, Disappearing Number, which I wasn't the designer on, I was just the engineer, but that had microphones on it just to get over the level of the underscore. While
and in fact,
trying to keep the play, I guess. While trying to
keep
it
it
to play.
Yes, and
Great. We've got any questions?
Doug, I've got a question for you as a director.
Yeah.
Because you like your sound and the music. How early in the process does that come in, and is it triggered by what the set design is giving you? What's the process between set design and the music and your choices?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd start with music. I listen to music first, so I will find music that feels as if it creates a sense of the emotional, tonal world. So I will start with music, and actually that leads on everything else, I think. And so, like Helen was saying, I would often, when we work together, I'd go, I'm listening to this kind of music. We might not end up using that music. We might find something else, but it would be in that territory. So at the moment, I am making, you know, Here I Am that we're rehearsing at the moment, which is a one-person show. Started with the music, and I mean, it was just by chance. It was Imogen Heap's music, because I've been talking to Imogen Heap because she lives locally. Rebecca knows this. And I've been listening. I've used her music before in the past, and I'm using her music in that. So I started with that, and actually, it's called "Here I Am" because one of the lyrics is "Here I Am" within a song. So it's actually become the title of the show as well. So I always start with music. I don't know why. That seems to be the thing that helps me think about the world.
I think quite a lot of directors do that though, because they listen to music while they read or write or do whatever. So quite a few people will come to you with musical references or that kind of context, and then you take it from there, basically.
I think you can shape it really well. I mean, you know, we listen. I kind of feel that you have a soundtrack to your life anyway. So if you're trying to, you know, it's a very quick and easy. It's a very quick way of kind of allowing you to pull together and understand what creatively you're trying to achieve.
Are there any other questions?
Is it easier to have a rigid structure, as I think Helen mentioned earlier, where it's like it's all written out what sound effects required, or is it easier for someone to give you that absolute freedom and say, this is kind of like what I'm going for, go away and make it and come back and let's hope that's what it is?
I quite like that's a tricky one though, because I quite like it structured, because then it gives me room to be more creative, because, and it's not necessarily like, for instance, with this writer that I work with, he doesn't necessarily say, he quite often is quite detailed in how he structures music. So he'll say, I want this track, and at 4 minutes into this track, this is going to happen and this, but that's because he's directing it as well as writing it, you know, so he's directing it in his brain. But then if it comes to a bit where there's going to be some madness going on, he'll just say, this is the vibe that I want in this section, if you see what I mean. Or this is the, you know, we're in this location, or we're in this world, or whatever. And I think that sometimes helps you to be more creative, because you have, because sometimes you can come into a project, you'd be like, I have no idea what you want or how I'm going to create it, because I just don't know, you know. If you haven't got anything tangible to hang on to, you know, sometimes it can be difficult. But equally then sometimes it can be really freeing, because you can just make whatever, you know. But I guess, so it is kind of useful, but then I guess it's also useful, I guess, to sort of like not worry if the directions aren't followed, if that makes sense. Like, to not pace too much, unless it's really like, this has to, but then that's a conversation between you and the director, isn't it? To sort of say, you got to do, oh, this is my vision, this is how I see it, and then it will come through, you know. But yeah, I think it's quite helpful for us to give us an idea of what to do, you know, or where to start, you know. And especially if you've got specific ideas or things. Yeah, go on, sorry.
I know I was not to say, I think not even from the writing, but I've had directors who've annotated the script when it comes to you with their own thoughts and ideas through it, and it allows you a little bit of, you go, okay, so I can get on that path, I know what that is, you know, rather than, I think sometimes
rather than spending a week scrabbling around going, I don't know what I'm doing, and then getting on the path.
And the heartbreak of that is actually thinking, I think I know what I'm doing, and you know, you give it a first pass or a second pass to a director, you go, something like this, and they go, no, you go, oh, okay. That was a bad week.
That's back to communication, isn't it? I suppose.
Well, it comes back to that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anything else? Any other questions? Lauren, did you get answer has yours been answered about how to approach sound designers?
I think the idea of annotating a script before you give it to someone is really interesting. That's not something that would have occurred to me. I think that's really, really helpful, because I think I would probably annotate it in quite a woolly way, and I'd like to think, having heard about that from Leigh, that my annotations I feel would be really woolly, but maybe woolly would kind of help you. Like, oh, that's her kind of thinking, but I can actually make that into something beautiful and tangible.
I think you know, with Helen, I've probably done a movement and a vague sound, or gone, I need something like this, and then Helen goes away and finds something.
But
so woolly is good. I think woolly is good. Go on.
Yeah, but I think there's one key point is because I know how directors talk to actors, and I think that it's interesting to note that, no offense to any actors, but I think the sound and technical people are a slightly different breed to actors, and I think you can be a bit more brutal with how you address them. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can be a bit more like cheese is cheese, you know, or something like that, just because not necessarily cheese, but you know, because I think that their brains are more technical. Not like we're creative, obviously, but our brains are a bit more technically minded. So we deal with facts and figures a bit better than we deal with. Although vagueness is good, like cheese, if it's cheese, call it cheese. You know, like quite often Doug will say to me, I want something like this, and I go, I'll just add some more reverb, shall I? And he'd be like, yeah. Yes. And I'll just be like, okay, fine. So, you know, there is that. And also, if you're working to a budget, or you like, say you're doing a project and you want a sound person to help you do it, but you don't have any money. Like, for instance, I did a project for a friend of mine recently. She said, I've only got 100 quid. I said, well, write down exactly what you want, or what you think you want, and give me the play, and I'll just make something and send it back to you. And then I just sent her the QLab file with all the sounds in it and all the music, all with the fades and stuff, and a cue list to tell her where to press the go button. And she just did it on her laptop, you know. And because you can get QLab, which is the program that we use to fire sounds in sequence. and you can get a demo version just for 2 channels or whatever. So if you do something really where there's no money and it's just 2 speakers on, you can just do it really simply like that. Or you can just say, so that's another good point if you're working on a budget, or you're working that way.
I think also working on a budget's a really, I think we kind of mentioned that before we joined everyone, but working on a budget's probably, it can be the most frustrating, but it can also be the most creative. I think, depending on you, again, it all comes back, I think as you talk more and more about it, it all comes down to the communication for what we're trying to achieve. I think we've all had conversations going, okay, I know we want to achieve this, but we don't have the money for that. We've got this. So how do we work our way around that? And that's a lot of the practical problem solving I think you do as sound designers. But some of my best experiences with sound design, I think, like you've just said, that what Helen's just said is probably one of my favourites that we were talking about.
About the cheese.
The cheese. Yeah. I'm always about the cheese. But that thing you just did for a friend,
yeah,
the thing that had Steely Dan in it had no money. It had no money. It was at the Vaults Fringe Festival. They literally had a laptop with QLab on it, and someone who'd never seen QLab before, who was operating lights, stage manager, in that kind of unsung hero role, and just kind of thrusting it at them and going, look, it will be fine, don't worry, and walking away and going, I hope it's fine. But they're the most enjoyable.
And that's also coming to Christine's point. That's about the history thing. That's why sound is so prevalent now. I think because even 10 years ago, you'd have to take the sound, you'd have to process it in a certain way, and then take it from your CD and put it in your computer and do this and do that, or your mini disc, and and now you can literally go, click, attach that. So, which is great because it's allowed us to be so much more creative with how we place sound and how we make sound. Even within QLab, you can stretch sound and do lots of things with it. So that's sort of how sound has changed, I guess, in there. I'm looking down there because you're down there on my screen, but you're not really down there, you're there. But that's how sound why sound, I think, is because it is just, and it is kind of good in a way because a director can say, I need a dog, and you can go, I've got a dog, there's a dog, which you wouldn't have been able to do 10 years ago.
And with a lighting design, obviously, if a director says, can it be a little bit warmer, can it be do this, that, obviously that is instantaneous because that's what the desk is there to do, or the lighting desk is there to do. But now, like Ed said, like with cutting and splicing tape, if the director wanted to change, can that be 30 seconds longer? Yeah, but you're not going to get it right now. But now, with QLab, with a few clicks of a button, I can make that rain 30 seconds, a minute longer. I can put it up here, up there. I can move with the actor. I
can slow it down, I can...
If you want it to kind of do all sorts of, wonderful things. Tying in with lighting, that sort of thing, Can it happen with this? Yeah, sure it can. And it's a lunch break that we get it done in rather than an afternoon,
Great. It's 8 o'clock. So I'm going to finish there. Thank you so much, you two. It's really, really great.
No, pleasure.
We kind of do a thing at the end just because it's always useful. Is there any takeaways, anything that people will take away from this that have been useful? Any particular things?
Us or
No, from everyone else.
I'll take everything.
Is there anything new in there? Anything that's useful?
It's just been really, really lovely to hear your process, both of you. Thank you for filling us in. It's it's interesting, kind of hearing how you talk through your process, because I actually find that I'm probably struggling most now with almost like information overload because we can do so much with sound now. It almost feels it can be a bit stressful to know where how to pare it down and kind of how to just get the job done that you're asked to do, as opposed to all of like these crazy tangents. So I guess my kind of I'm intrigued as to how you kind of simplify what you do sometimes in your head, if does that make sense? Like we can do almost anything, but should we?
I think the refinement is always something that I think you're always tweaking, and especially with like sound effects, there's always a mad dash and you go, actually, I wasn't happy with that last night. Can I do this? Can I do that? I don't know I think you just have to keep it in mind. Is what I'm doing adding to the show, or is it just slowing it down?
Is it telling a story?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this just stuff and nonsense? Some of my loveliest ideas that I've had, you know, you listen to it and you think, this is adding nothing to this scene, and all I'm doing is getting in the way of what the actor's trying to do. So, you know, let's get out of the way of that. I would say to anyone that's not sound orientated, I think one of the best things to take away something is have a look at QLab. But have a look at it, have a play with it. Like Helen said, you can get it free. It's a very pared down version, so it's just, you can just do audio left and right out your laptop, that sort of thing. But have a play with it, understand how we use it. But don't ever think that you can know the ins and outs of it, because I think the most frustrating thing for me, correct me if I'm wrong, Helen, is when you're trying to do something and, you know, I think because QLab has become such a big and an influential piece of software, it's very easy to get wrapped up in it. And I think everyone can think that they know QLab because you've done it before, and I think that understand what it does, understand the process of it, and hopefully allow us to kind of get it wrong. Is that right? I think that's.
Yeah, I guess so.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So I've got this flight.
Yeah, I know. I think what you say. I think when I was a younger sound designer, I used to put a kitchen sink into my shows, and now I think, which I think sometimes works, but I think now less is more. What's telling the story, and what's not getting in the way of the actors.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what's important, I think.
Any other takeaways?
What's enhancing this?
Anything else? Don't have to. Thank you. So just a couple of bits before we finish, a couple of housekeeping things. So unfortunately for the moment, this is going to be the last Outer Limits online. And that's partially because, unfortunately, Lauren has been furloughed. So, she's waving. She came around and said, lovely, she's here. Well, you're across the country, theatres are scrabbling to put staff into furlough because the last date to be able to put people into furlough is tomorrow. And so with an uncertain future, we are trying to furlough as many staff as possible to keep our outgoings low. So communications across the country with this is going to be very difficult from tomorrow, which we're finding out already.
Everyone will be emailing you, Doug.
No, exactly. The things I have been doing this week are fun. Cleaning a toilet this morning was a good one. That was quite good for an actor. Because we don't have any cleaners, and I didn't want Danielle to clean the toilet. So that's what I was doing this morning. But we will come back. I think we'll definitely come back I want to do another one of those social sessions. So I think I'm in rehearsal for the next 2 weeks, and that's partially why we can't really carry on for just a little bit, because I'm going to be writing, making. And then I'm on annual leave, but I think we'll come back and do a nice big end social together, a bit like the one we did before with more people. So just keep an eye out for that. If there are any questions, if you have anything you want to ask, you can still send them to me. You can email me, douglas@queens-theatre.co.uk. And then on that, it's been brilliant over the 9 weeks. I've really enjoyed, it's been so wonderful to spend time with people like Leigh and Helen. And of course, all of you and all your wonderful responses and thoughts. The other thing is we haven't announced this yet. It will be coming out we are hopefully streaming The Hired Man online. So that will, one of our shows you'll be able to see. Hopefully next week. That hasn't been announced yet. We're still tying off some things about that. And then a few weeks later, we're going to be broadcasting a new 30-minute piece live from the theatre, and it's a love letter from the theatre to its community, and that's all based on the survey, the questions that we've been asking our community about their experiences of lockdown. So I'm making that at the moment. I think it's going to be really special. So look out for that. It's free. You just pop along and come and watch us reflect back our community's stories. And the survey results are extraordinary. The things that people have been going through. Funny, delightful, heartbreaking, but the kind of takeaways from it all. It's really extraordinary. So do come along to that. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time. And
Thank you.
You can always email me.
Thank you.
If you need to ask anything.
Thank
And
you.
we'll see you
Good
soon.
night.
Take care. Lots of love.
Thank
Thank
you
you much.
Bye.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Bye bye.